I'd like to continue now with Vanessa Manko. Vanessa is an American writer. She's not in exile, other than perhaps feeling sometimes in exile because she's imagining a world of an exile. Her first novel will be coming out in August. It's called The Invention of Exile, and the main character is a failed inventor who lives a life of multiple exiles.
Yes, and just before I read a little more of a summary of the book, is that the main character was a Russian immigrant who was deported from the U.S. during the first wave of the Red Scare, returns to Russia and has to flee once again, winding up living in Mexico City, struggling to reunite with his family in the U.S. And the section I'm going to read is just after he's left the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, and it has been an unsuccessful visit to the embassy. A city awakening. Siesta is over. The sky has grown crimson and mauve, with gray plumes rising up from factories situated on the city's periphery. Lovers open windows. Shopkeepers roll up gated storefronts, and people emerge from narrow, dark doorways. Blue clouds lined in blood orange sit on the horizon. Sun and dust, broken stone. He feels heavy, his whole body turned inward. He sits down, he rises. He walks beneath the building's arcade, the marble slippery. He leans against the railing, enclosing the small manicured gardens of magnolia trees, palms. So much like those first weeks in Mexico City. How dizzying the impression for an emigre without a map. He'd come to the embassy, had been so certain then, brazen enough to believe his passage to America would be swift, secured. He is still hoping for that day. He walks down the stairs and across the street, his brown, sorry loafers caked with dust. He draws a cigarette from his back pocket, stops at the corner to light it, watching as the little flicker of blue begins before the burn. A car speeds past, its motor loud. Over the car's fading rumble, and from a window open and overhead, he hears the faint voice of someone singing, a warble like that of a bird. The tightness in his chest loosens. He raises the cigarette to his lips, exhaling. He leans back against the building, one leg tucked up and under, resting against the stucco wall, its grainy surface pressing through his shirt. The last of the sun cuts a diagonal of light across his body. A man marked, a man crossed out. For just a fleeting moment, Austin feels something like contentment. So tired he is of always wishing to be elsewhere. A respite from longing, an easy satisfaction in a small desire sated. A last inhale, and he tosses the cigarette to the ground, wishing it could be the day. He had tried to adapt as well as he could, had come to, some might say, resign himself to this adopted country of his with its bright sun, dusty roads, sepia buildings, past built upon past, a city stripped down and built up again. But it was not the life he was supposed to live, this life, this Mexico City life. He closes his eyes, and there they are, all quite clearly going on about their lives, waking in those cold northeastern mornings when it was dark blue and felt as if night had forgotten to end, the heater clanking the children awake, he imagines. 3 children, each born in a different country, Russia, France, Mexico, and all now Americans. They were walking around in streets filled with memories of his young manhood, his children there without him. He can sometimes feel them when younger, their small arms around his neck when he carried them in the early years in Mexico, the sound of their voices saying, "Papa." How does one live with longing? He knows it. It was as if he were forever reaching, arms extended in a gesture of entreaty, pulling on a rope, hand over hand, fist over fist, the rope only growing longer. Thank you.
Vanessa, you're in a very different circumstance, and the question I'd like to ask you has a very different perspective. Your book originated with a feeling of being exiled and away from your own family's past. So in a sense, it represents a way to imagine your way into an imaginary homeland, which it turned out to be a story of exile. So how important was research in your writing, and why or why not was research important?
Well, I do want to make clear that yes, I'm not a writer writing in exile. I was born and raised in Connecticut, and I live here in Brooklyn. But I like the idea that I was exiled from my family history. I think that I sort of grew up closer to one side of my family, which was the Italian-American side. And when I thought about my father's side of the family, which was this Russian-Ukrainian background, it was very other to me. And so when I began to learn the story, I felt enormously humbled because it was this large story that, as I began researching, which was extremely important, I didn't know. And it was extremely revealing and eye-opening, and told me a lot more about my own heritage that I didn't know. So research was incredibly important. I had to imagine what it was to be an immigrant, a Russian immigrant in the United States during the first wave of the Red Scare, and I had to put my character in a cultural context and understand what it was to be an immigrant, to not know the language, to try to adapt to America, and then do the same thing following my character to Russia after the Russian Revolution and during the Civil War, and imagining what it was like to flee Russia, be kicked out of yet another country, and wind up in Mexico. And so I did a tremendous amount of research on the Russian immigrant community in the United States. I read fiction and history and memoirs of revolutionary Russia, the Civil War. I did a lot of research on Mexico City in the 1930s and 40s, which is considered sort of that city's golden era. And so I would say it was research played a huge role in helping me to imagine the story.